thank you very much to our two presenters today, who are the experts in the field that are going to lead our discussion. So I think a brief presentation and then lots of opportunity for discussion. And so today we have Mr. Ray Stopa, who is in charge of finance for the School of Medicine and
for the School of Medicine and the Research and Compliance Division.
Okay.
Which that division is basically sponsored programs, IRB, environmental health and safety, radiation safety, and the animal court.
Okay. Thank you. And then our other presenter today, Jared Lawrence, administrator for the Department of Biomedical Sciences. And he's awesome at his job. So
Yes, he is.
he also, you know, at the departmental level, the administrators located in each of our three basic science departments should be your best friends, because they're going to help you get your stuff done. Grants submitted, budgets balanced, and blah, 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 people hired, etc. So thank you both for being here. All right, I'll turn it over to you guys. And I assume that you're open to questions as you go along and present, or would you rather?
No, I questions as they come up, and I think we're going to stick with the order of the topics, given the faculty that are here. They're kind of arranged in an order that would probably be more pertinent, that definitely are more pertinent to newer faculty, to, I'll call it, more seasoned faculty. If we don't get through all the topics, which we may not, Jared and I are more than happy to come back in another session, because the last 3 or 4 slides, although they may not be important to you today, my guess is will be very important to you a couple of years down the road. Okay, for the new faculty anyway.
And then I'll just say this is a great opportunity. If you have any question about, like, how does money work in the school or the university, like, this is your chance to ask that, whatever that weird question is.
And I also want to thank the more seasoned faculty for being here, because I'm really hoping that when we get to the challenges, opportunities, discussions at the end of each topic, I mean, yeah, I live this from off in a different room, and you guys live this day to day. So the value you add to the discussion, I think, is wonderful. And I would agree with the comment that Dr. Hanson made about your administrator. Leverage them and leverage me. I may not have an answer to your question. Jared may not have, well, he's more likely to have an answer to your question. If we don't have the answer, we are the ones who should be able to redirect you to the appropriate person to talk to. Or if we don't know who that is, we should be able to find out for you, so that you're getting a knowledge answer, as opposed to, well, here's what I think you should do type thing. Okay? So please do not hesitate to pick up that phone or stop us in the hallway. Okay? So discussion topics.
I'm not sure if that clicker up there works or not, but
This one?
yeah. It works.
What? No, that's all right. We can do this.
Just a space. There you go.
Okay, so general topics that we'd like to walk through. I'll let you look at those for a little bit. And if you want to reorder those, happy to do it. This is for your benefit, not my benefit. Well, kind of on my benefit, is hopefully it reduces questions or makes them, more direct, if you will. So lab startup packages, and then as you roll into your grant awards, they're the same, but they're different, because the detail needed for one is different than the detail needed for another. The approval processes for one is different than the approval processes for other, from the external and internal Creighton University standpoint. What you control versus what other parties control. We'll go through that. There are a lot of things that you kind of like, well, This is my lab staffing. I control that. You do, but there's hurdles you have to go over that help you control that. General cost principles, unallowable costs, kind of give you an overview. There are references that we'll provide you with. Sponsored programs, grants accounting, Jared, things like that that can help guide you and direct you on that. And then University and School of Medicine Research incentive plans. The School of Medicine has had a plan that has changed a little bit over the past, I'll say 4 or 5 years. And the university has just now implemented a new plan, which for just about everyone in this room, even if they have a grant that isn't applicable yet, it will be it's probably starting to be applicable for new grants that are coming through. So, and that there are probably more questions and really good questions that will be generated by those last section of slides. That way I'm saying, if we don't get to that, I'm more than happy to have a discussion either in this arena or coming to your individual departments and having those discussions, which we have had already a couple of times, but there's more questions that need to be answered. Okay, so let's kind of dive in. Multi-year budgets. When you get via your letter of offer a lab startup package, or due to a grant submission, you receive a grant award, you're going to have to prepare with other people's guidance and assistance a multi-year budget. More than likely, there's not a lot of grants that I see, correct me if I'm wrong, seasoned faculty, not a lot of one-year grants. They're smaller. They're typically multi-year things, and then include your startup package. Okay. Chair and your assigned faculty member, visit with them about your research. It could be something as general on conducting it. It could be as simple or as simple or as complicated as protocols to establish. Who do I go to set those protocols? Who do I have to submit them to? Who approves them? Use that mentor and the chair for guidance. That's what they're there to do at a high level. Make it easier for you to move through that process. Department administrator, Jared, Gail McNeely, or Mary Bruchet, their job is to really walk you through the process. Make sure you're doing A, then B, then C, then D, etc. So you don't do D first and you get in trouble because you don't have A done. Okay, it happens. And it's allowable depending on the personality of the person you're submitting to. And then after you're, the second or third time through it, you'll have an established pecking order, if you will, or order of things to get done. That administrator can also provide you with guidance on contacts. Who do I go to for this? Who do I go to for that? Jared, Gail, and Mary don't do everything. But they should be able to, for those things they don't do, they should be able to direct you with the person that can provide you with the most information and the best information. Peer faculty. Don't understate this one. Visit with those people that have been here a year or 2 or 3. Go to the Dr. Norse, okay? And just say, what works? What didn't work? Who do I avoid? I'm not kidding you. Who do I avoid? Who's a great resource? Who can be helpful on this topic? Who can tell me about this? They'll know. They'll know who can help you walk through the minefield of developing an animal protocol and what needs to be there and what doesn't need to be there. Whereas it might be a different story if you call up somebody in sponsored programs for advice. They might be a little less tolerant, if you will. Just, they understand the personalities, they understand the people that have oversight for things, they've been through the process. I personally think the peer faculty and you being involved in the milieu of your peer faculty should it should be required. Don't just sit yourself in your lab and work in your lab. Work with those peers. I do think their advice is invaluable. Okay. Operating concerns. Or once you establish your budget, I'm gonna let Jared talk about it specifically a little bit. Mid-year review. Once you establish your budget, no matter how high level or low level it is important to review that budget periodically. I suggest to have every 6 months, so that you know, and your administrator knows, and ultimately your chair or mentor know, yep, we're making progress as expected. Oh, it's going faster than expected. Well, I thought I needed this first, or I thought the data acquisition was gonna cost me a lot. It didn't. Can I move some of that cost to the later phases where I'm doing other things, drafting proposals or publications or whatever the case is. It also helps, especially with lab startup packages. Some of you have state-funded lab startup packages. Others have internally funded startup packages that we sincerely hope will turn over to state-funded lab startup packages. The state of Nebraska works on a biennium. Every 2 years, they work on a budget. So we get money from the state to support various initiatives, one of which is lab startup packages for new faculty. It supports research going forward in the organization. When you set up your initial budget, let's say you have $500,000. You're going to allocate that over 3 years. Maybe it's $250,000, $150,000, and $100,000. Yeah. But once you get into it, operating into it, no, it should have been 150, 150, 200, or it should have been 100, 150, 200, should have been exact reverse. We need to know how things are progressing from an expenditure standpoint so that we can help the university reallocate dollars you're not going to use, or get access to additional dollars that you didn't anticipate needing during a given year. They give that to other faculty or faculty resources, and then it also allows them to budget next year the distribution that they're allocating so much to Dr. Jha versus Dr. Tao versus Dr. Wong, right? So having that mid-year assessment, if nothing else, allows us to be better stewards of the funding the university has allocated to the School of Medicine, to the department, and to each individual PI. Believe me, they appreciate it because we're the only school, to my knowledge, that's doing this. I also think, let's step away from your startup packages. Once you get into a grant situation, I think that information is also very valuable, so that you can give it to your project officer that you may be in a situation where you need a no-cost extension, or you need to reallocate budget funding from a salary line to a consultative services line. And I think, isn't it 20%? Or is it 10%?
So state grants are different from federal in that the state really has pools in terms of a salary pool, a supply pool, and then other costs. And so if you have a grant for $100,000, they will allow you to shift automatically without asking for permission 10% from one pool to another pool. If you're going to exceed that, then you have to write in, revise your budget and ask for permission to do that. The federal government isn't nearly as restrictive. They don't necessarily follow salary lines or supplies. It's more about you try to stay, they want you to have spent down at least 75% of your funding within that each grant year. If you have that same $100,000 grant, you've only spent $60,000, then you're going to have to go back and ask for, or make an explanation as to why you want to carry forward more than 25% of your funds from one year to the next year.
So for
I have a question regarding the 75% you have to spend within that year. Is some of these like, previous years that have leftover, say like I have a lot of leftover, 50K roll over to the next year. Does the 70, so when they calculate the 75% for the second year, is that the total sum left over, or it's just the
So-
specific to?
So if you have that 50, whatever the number is that carries forward, what they'll do at the end of year two, let's say you have a $300,000 award for year two, you have to, you can only carry over 25% of that 300 from year two to year three, no matter how much you carried over from year one.
Oh,
You can do it, but you're still gonna have to provide an explanation. If it is greater than 25%.
So if, let's say you have a grant that's 3 years, 300, 300, 300. The first year you only spend 250, you have 50 carried forward. The second year, you also only spend 250, you have 50 carried forward. And third year, you only spend 250, 50. Do you now have 150 for that no cost extension that you can put in the fourth year so it can be additive over time?
It is.
Okay,
And so to your thing, so at the end of year one, carrying forward 50, you're under the 25%, it's just automatic. Year two, then you'd have 100,000 out of 300. Now you're gonna have to write an explanation, say why I have 100 going to year three.
but will they allow that? Like
Yes.
it's okay.
Yeah, you just have to explain, and there could be lots of things, in terms of staffing or during the pandemic, you just couldn't get supply items or mice or whatever it was. I mean, usually there is probably a reason why it happened. You just have to explain it, and they're pretty good about it.
Have you
That's federal, yeah.
have you ever heard about like somebody writing this kind of explanation and then the NIH just reject it and then take the money? I mean, we just don't
Yeah.
want the government to take away our
Yeah.
grants.
Yeah, no, I haven't. And I can think, a grant where essentially, and it was a larger federal where they were getting $500,000 per year. And at the end of the 4-year grant, they pretty much had $400,000. But they were able to explain as to why they had that amount. It was all carried forward into that extra year. Yep. And in some cases, it's unusual, but you may even need a second no cost extension because you just haven't been able to get the work done.
I don't know what others think, but I think it's good to plan for a no cost extension because 5 years, you won't believe how fast, some of you will believe how fast 5 years goes, but it goes really fast. And sometimes, getting the publications out and all the work done, you're not where you want to be. And if you save up money so that you can have a 6th year, your productivity is just looks so much better, for a competitive renewal or for whatever.
Because you're really writing your competitive renewal in year 4.
Yeah,
Your 5-year.
yeah. That's tough, right?
I'd just like to add that what we're talking about are R1s and R21. If it's going to be a COBRA or an INBRE grant, there are different rules, and I would talk to the program directors of those grants when it comes to a COBRA or INBRE grant. It's a different institute and different rules. But for R1s and R21s, I believe it's the same across all the institutes.
and again, your faculty mentor and your administrator, they'll understand those things. They'll know the different rules that apply depending on the grant.
For the state grants, really, there is generally no cost extension. I mean, pandemic, there were some things, but
Last
the
year, we got,
money's gone up to 30.
we got 2. I think we had maybe 3 and 2 that with no cost extension for 6 months. Show.
So the reason the state's different is the state monies that we get come effectively from the tobacco settlement endowment that was given to the state. So it's this big bolus of money. And this is totally the way it works, but pretty close. So if you've got $200 million and it spins off 4% every year, the state has that 4% of $200 million to distribute to ourselves, Boys Town, and UNMC, basically. Okay, so if that money isn't spent during a set period of time, and over those 2 years, actually, it's year specific, but there's you can get a carryover from year 1 to year 2. But if it's not spent at the end of the 2 years, it's gone. That money stays, basically gets reinvested back into that $200 million pool of funds, and then there's a new distribution that comes out. Now, what we've allowed within certain limits, if you have $500,000 and you haven't spent it to the end of your 3 years, if you spent, let's say, $400 of the $500,000, we'll give you that. We'll ask the state or try to give you an allocation of $100,000 for that 4th year. If it gets to beyond 5 years, it's kind of like, at that point in time, what's the problem? Why? We need to figure out why the research isn't progressing your lab startup the way you thought it would. And there could be a very reasonable, logical explanation for it. But there are, as Dr. Hansen referenced, there are cutoffs on the state from the award that you get for each year. Doesn't mean you lose it. It just means it has to be moved to a future year.
Instead of this being the startup package that comes from the state and the internal.
And that would apply to state and internal. And the internal allocation of startup funds that we've had to do this year is brand new for Dr. Loki, Dr. Kasha, Dr. Long. Those would typically be state funded startup packages, and we're hoping to move that to state funding. To be real honest with you, it's in the university's best interests, my belief, the way it operates for that to happen. We need to get some things settled. It'll happen. Your funding is there. Your funding is not. Your funding is there. The School of Medicine is absolutely dedicated to funding what was in your letter of offer. It's not going away. That I can tell you with 100% certainty.
Because I think during the interview, I think I saw that, let's say you get startup package and also have funding grant, you kind of tend to use up the funding grant a lot more, and you get some money saved in startup, and that could be used as a with the School of Medicine to kind of like rephrase it as a different grant and use it for a side project or something like that. Is that something that
We've had a few examples of that. The best example right now is Dr. Zloki. I mean, she's got a startup package, but she's funded to an extent. So she's using her startup package, I think mainly for equipment, but then also for side projects that are maybe the best way to do this is you get funding for federal research, and then you get a grant award. You're progressing down that grant award toward the goal or the aims of that grant, and you come up with data that suggests, oh, if this is reasonable, then you can use that startup package within certain time frames to fund the unfunded research that new aim that's not funded by the grant could potentially generate. And we had a faculty member recently where that happened. So yeah, it can be.
There is a time cap for that. We have to spend within 5 years.
5 years is a general time cap. However, I'm going to tell you, if it was a situation where definitely if it was School of Medicine funded, we can allow that to be extended. If it was state funded, it might depend upon what other newer researchers are now in the queue that need money for their lab startup package. Excuse me. So I can't make a promise that it'll be there beyond 5 years, but we are hopeful that
But it's best to spend within 5 years.
it is. Any detailed questions about, we'll get into the individual items that make up the budget here in a little bit, but any questions kind of in general?
No, I have another question. So, for some of the federal grant that's awarded to other institutions, but sometimes we get some contract sub award. Does the 25% rule still apply to our part? Like, say I get 50K per year for 3 years from another institution, and that's a R1 subcontract. So do I have to spend 35?
That's gonna be between you and the PI on the prime award. In terms of, what deliverables you're giving back to them versus the money you're spending, but that would come out in the annual either renewal of the subaward that you get from the primary institution. It'd be one where if you're the subawardee, you're gonna want to talk to the prime award to make sure, because they are the ones who have to file the no cost extension. As a subawardee, you do not file.
So
the no-cost
mostly just follow whatever the primary awardees rules and conditions.
Yeah.
And how fast is this kind of sub-award? Like, in some other institutions, it's super slow. Sometimes it takes like 10 months to transfer, like even $20,000 sub-award. I just don't have direct experience here.
I think once we get the award notice, if you get the grant and you want to award a subaward somewhere else, that would have been in your proposal. And so once we get the award, we ask you and say, okay, has anything changed? You got fully funded? Then we're gonna go ahead and follow the instructions that were provided at the time we submitted the grant, unless you have anything else. And then a couple of weeks.
Took me half a year.
Yeah. From UW. Yeah, that one, yeah. So
So if we are the recipient, it usually depends on the.
we have no control.
Okay.
But at the same time, you shouldn't start the work until you have the money, so.
It happens a couple times, like when the sub award arrived eventually. It expired, basically. So
Yes.
it's like 1 year or like within that 2-year R21, then takes 10 months to get the little bit of money transferred, and then it's time to write the report, and then it's just.
I mean, put it back on the prime institution, say, I'm not gonna start work on your project until I'm funded. And if then they need to go ahead and apply for no cost extension.
You cannot start with your startup package to do the work on the timeline and then just use the money you receive later. You cannot
Well,
do that.
You can, but you put yourself at risk, because if they end up not coming through with that money, then you just spent your startup money on their project.
You have to be a little bit careful about spending money on the subcontract on things that you weren't subcontracting.
So you cannot pre-use the money and then ask that the money you receive reimburse.
So
As you're used.
it's all gonna depend on how the subaward is written, because obviously it's gonna have a time frame. And you probably don't wanna pre-spend very much money on a project.
If there was an audit on that,
Yeah.
it's a red flag. How about that? If you're pre-spending.
What if it's your own institution? It's just taking forever.
Yeah.
But if you're
It
supporting,
happens. I mean,
so-
I think my current R01, well, Jared can remind me, I'll probably remember it in an exaggerated way, the fish was this big, but it came, a 5-year award, and I think I got the email of, like, the institution got the emailed award, the official award notification after the start date.
Yeah.
And then the money didn't come. And then after the money was available to the institution, then it takes the institution sometimes to set up an account number that you can spend it on. So by the time I got the money, I had like 8 months to spend the first year's worth of money. And I think my first year, they gave me only like 11 months anyway, so it was, yeah. It's NIH
So I
Ends
believe
life.
it's kind of like first, well, first events in June. Right, yeah, and I'm still God, I think from state, transferring from Mass.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you probably run into something where you have to file a no cost extension, yeah.
Maybe you can speak a little bit to, you know, a hypothetical situation. Say you have an award notice, the award is imminent. But the money's not there yet. And you have the need to support personnel, or you lose personnel. What does the university allow in terms of pre-spending? That's what situation.
I think there's something there in terms of if you've got the notice of award. So essentially then we do have the money, right? As opposed to if you receive a favorable score and you've put in your just in time and I really probably should be getting a award notice. Is that, I'm trying to.
So the start date in the notice of award is the date that you can start spending money. Whether or not actual dollars have arrived, if you will, at the institution. And typically, most grants, the dollars are there. You draw down on that after the expenditure's been incurred.
It's the
We do
same
have a-
for,
Sorry,
it's the same for an award and a subcontract that you were talking about. It took 6 months to get a subcontract. Or flow of money from a subcontract.
Hopefully, the date of that subcontract, that's why it is very important to have a, excuse me. It is very important to have a formal document for that subaward, because my guess is the subaward is no different than the actual main award itself. The date of initiation for that subaward is the date you can start spending that money, even though the money hasn't physically come in yet.
It's one of those things, at least in IH most time, there is a pre-awards spending period where you can spend, but again, you're putting yourself at risk, because if you're not funded, then you've spent money you don't have.
we do have a bridge funding policy, which, you know, you guys have startup for the most part, or you're funded. So it doesn't really apply, but if faculty have a gap in their funding and they have a track record of external funding, there is a school of medicine guideline or a sort of, it's policy sort of within the school that's under my authority. So that means I manage the process where you could talk to me and your chair, maybe probably the chair first. But you know, sometime if you have a gap in funding, there is a mechanism by which you can request some funds to tide you over till the next grant, so you don't have to fire personnel, so that you keep things going, keep your competitiveness. So that is on the internet, in the section where all our guidelines are. I don't know how well publicized it is, but
Send you guys a link.
It's available.
Yep.
Know that it's a resource that's available to you. And just knowing, you can say, is this a situation, Jared, where I might have access to bridge funding? Or your chair or your mentor, whoever the case is. And then they can tell you yes, no, whatever, do the research, refer you where you need help.
Can the subcontract be backdated to the date of the notice of award?
Yeah, I mean, we make kind of like the original award, I mean, or Latau, I mean, it took forever for them to get here, but they did backdate it, so in terms of anything he was spent during that time, we can still claim it as a reimbursable expense, yeah.
So you were not. It wasn't that you were unable to spend the money, it was just a long time before the process.
But you need to be careful. If you use a startup funds, it ends in June for the fiscal year. If the funds is the year after that date, you probably wouldn't have been able to reallocate to your staff funds. It's just more difficult for them to do the journal entries. I think that's my understanding.
Yeah, because startup funds and for yourself, because you are state funded, when we hit the end of that biennium from the state, once those books are closed, we can't go back and say, oh, we spent money on that startup that we now want to move to a federal award.
Yep.
And go to the state and say, well, the number we reported to you wasn't quite correct, so.
That's a no-no.
Yeah, just be careful.
Yeah.
Don't steer it.
Regarding that bridge funding, hopefully we never need to
Yep.
use it, but it happens.
Yep, plenty of
So
successful
what's
faculty
what's
have
the
used
usual like size? 50K,
it.
100K?
So it's in the guideline, it talks about it, and it is like 10% of the average extramural funding you've had each year for the past 5 years or 3 years, something like that. And so there have been, so, you know, you would talk to your chair first. I mean, you know, you may have research incentive funds in an account that you would use. Or the chair may have some funds to also support a gap in funding. But after talking to the chair, then you should approach me and you know, with a request, and there's a lot of detail in the guideline about what it looks like. But yeah, I mean, it could be 50,000 or 100,000 or more. And usually it's 1 year, but we have made provision for the possibility of 2 years. And you know, you'd have a plan of like, you know, this is how I'm gonna get. This is my plan for getting the next grants.
When you calculate the average of the extra.
Yeah.
funding, Is that included like direct and indirect total or indirect?
You know what, all the details are in that guidelines, but I think it's direct costs. And it's extramural funding, so your startup wouldn't count. And I think we also put in that the requirement that your grant submissions to NIH after that bridge fund award would go through the mock study section. Like, that's a leverage.
And
Let's
that's a
help you make
positive,
it
that's a
easier.
positive requirement, because the success that Dr. Hanson and Dr. Bartz have had with that preview session of submissions that either didn't get scored, but now did get scored, or submissions that were scored high versus getting an award, significant. So it's in your best interest to have at the end of your bridge funding, or at some point in time, your bridge funding, because the likelihood of you getting an award, which is that bridge, right, is a lot higher. And if you have success, just because you have bridge funding one time doesn't mean you can't get it a second time. If you had a long career here and you were funded for 5 years and had a 1 year gap, need some bridge funding, that were funded for 5 years and then had another gap, yeah, they're gonna look at that and say, oh, okay, yeah, this is reasonable. As long as you have a good plan and it looks like the viability of you getting funded for that plan is pretty good, it's probably gonna happen.
And the process is laid out, so it's me together with basic science chairs, vetting that, and then really I make a recommendation to the dean based, he's the final decision maker.
Policy is that everybody should be 50% of the average direct funding for the last 5 years with a cap of 100,000.
I think we've exceeded the cap. I'm confident we have, but you know,
Again, it's based on the plan. If the research plan looks really good, yeah, we'll make that investment in you, absolutely. Okay,
should we distribute lunches and keep going, or do you want to do that while we keep going?
Up to
Yeah,
you.
I
think we can do it
I'll
while
do
we
it
keep
while you-
going.
okay.
Yep.
So let's talk about what you control and others control. The discussion surrounding the bullet points in this slide is not meant. You have control of a lot of things that are on this list. But you have to put it through an approval process in most cases. So general research, the general research you're pursuing, that's yours. You control that. The university's not telling you you have to do A versus B versus C. That is, you are technically accountable. Your advancement in the organization is accountable to the productivity of your research. So you should have control of that research. Now, there's federal and state research guidelines that we have to apply to, university guidelines have to apply to, but the topic, the aims of your research, pretty much yours. Okay? Lab staffing. Pretty much yours. But there are approval hurdles that you have to go through. I will tell you that we have in the School of Medicine been very successful in streamlining the process. If you ask for a research assistant or a lab tech or a postdoc or whatever the case is, it could take months in the past to get that approved. Now, if it's funded if it has a funding source attached to it, it kind of just goes through the process. It might take a couple weeks to a month, but it's not taking the months that it used to. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more on that. There's another slide that has a whole bunch more detail about options and considerations, etc. For the most part, you control it. We just have to get through the process. And when you need a resource, person to come to, for example, would be Jared or the other administrators in your areas. They can help you with that physician requisition process of getting that file.
And actually, it's grant funded. It's taking approval really 2 to 3 days. Before you can get close to it. So it goes pretty quick.
Purchasing, again, it's driven by your research. You pretty much control that. However, I would tell you there are approval processes around that. The approval process for equipment and maintenance contracts is much more onerous than for supplies and materials. If you need beakers, reagents, whatever the case is, you talk to Jared or to the procuring assistants in your department. They put through the requisition, off you go. I mean, it's that easy. When it gets to an equipment situation, if it's a minor piece of equipment, like let's say maybe $5,000, still pretty easy. You get to larger pieces of equipment, then you have to go through a bidding process, make sure that you get more than one quote. You have to, if it could be a full source contract where you say, no, this is the only manufacturer that makes this piece of equipment. I have to have this one for this reason. If you provide that information or that support for that, then it goes to the process pretty easy, but you have to supply that sole sourcing documentation. Otherwise, it needs to go through the bidding process. If it's a large piece of equipment that it doesn't require setup or anything like that. It's just delivered. You put it on the bench top and off you go. Pretty easy. If it's a larger piece of equipment and it requires ventilation or requires some type of setup by the manufacturer or by individuals that we have to contract with or our internal, that's a longer process, and you have to involve, and Jared can help you with this when this goes through, but you might have to get facilities involved where they have to bring a team in. It might be that you have to bring in a contractor, a local contractor that is authorized to set that piece of equipment up by the manufacturer. It takes a little while. I'm not saying it's going to take months and months and months and months, but it could take a month to get that stuff done, a couple of weeks. So it's different. And if there's a maintenance contract attached to that piece of equipment, that's going to go through the university's contract process, which can be very simple or can be very drawn out. If it's a simple maintenance contract on a piece of equipment, you have all the backup for it. You have an individual that submits contracts within each of your departments because it has to go through purchasing's approval. It has to go for strategic sourcing's approval. It has to go through legal review. It has to be approved by somebody in the School of Medicine. There are others in the process. And then there is one person in the university, literally one person in the university that can sign that contract, all contracts. But if all the documentation is there that they need, and the form that gets submitted tells you what you need to submit. And it's typically not onerous for a maintenance contract. The issue that comes with the maintenance contracts are if the vendor is a unapproved vendor, is a vendor we've had risk or issues with, whatever the case is, it might take a while to get it. Maybe there's language issues in the contract that legal says, we don't like the fact that this is governed by the laws of the state of Delaware. We want it the laws of the state of Nebraska. I mean, some of those things can slow that process up, but for the most part, it'll go through pretty. For the most part. Jared, any thoughts on that?
And it's just, if they get, like I said, if they get stuck on certain
Yeah.
clause, then there's some back and forth and communicating with the vendor.
Risk management gets involved where they say, no, this is not the right word, breakable, highly breakable piece of equipment. Hey, why are we being held responsible during the delivery process? That should be the vendor's issue, not ours. Might be discussions about that. They can hold something at the delivery of the product. Even though everybody's approved the product or the piece of equipment, it might take a while to get the contract. Okay, so different for equipment for higher end, more expensive equipment than just your basic supplies and materials.
I love to say if it's less than $5,000, it might look like equipment, but it's not. In terms of purchasing. It's just a supply.
Yep, it's just minor equipment. You just say, no, we're inexpensive. Well, it doesn't matter if you're gonna use it for 5 years or 10 years or a year.
What is the truth of if you, so it's not even necessarily equipment, it's any purchase requisition that's over $5,000, red flag goes up. And you either need competing bids or you need a sole source justification. Is that correct?
Is that true even for
Yeah.
supplies?
Yeah, though, yes, so if you place an order, you have, I don't know, a bunch of reagents and it's multiple things, you cluster them all together with, say, Fisher, because they're going to be a nice break. Then you need a sole source for it. Yeah, because the opposite way is you can't take the piece of equipment or something and break it off into different invoices to circumvent the cap, so. You can order 1 or 100 things if it's more than 5,000.
Sole source is
So you
usually,
probably say that this is the only way to get this.
Right.
I mean, sole source is usually pretty easy. We routinely place like 50,000 sequencing reagents, and just be careful because the certain approvers will change your code. So these are reagents, supplies. They are not equipment, but when sometimes they look at the numbers like $50,000, they automatically think it's equipment. So they will change your code. And then it may or may not be caught by somebody, like Gerald reminded us once, but sometimes they feed all the way through the train. So it's just
It also applies to services too, they're doing really expensive, you know, secrets, stuff like that.
So for any right now, so they're looking as big as that. So hopefully people.
Again, that's one of those situations where your administrator really advises. University, Department, School, and Resources.
Could I make a comment just about the purchasing?
Absolutely.
One thing that's not in your control, and I think was a big expense, is shipping costs. So I keep pretty meticulous details about everything we spend, how much it costs, how much shipping costs. But you won't see this in CY Plus. You'll see what the purchase cost is. I spend 70% of all my purchases outside of lab staff. All my reagents and everything purchases, including floors, uses and everything, 7% of that is increased because of shipping. Right, so some things we order, we 100% shipping costs, right? The same, shipping's the same price as what you get. Some things are zero, right? If you get it from Matheson, it's zero, or if you get a fourth facility service, but my whole budget, 7% right now is shipping. So that's a pretty extensive cost that you won't really see.
You could run into trouble at the end of the year.
Yeah.
If you think you've spent exactly the right amount and you actually spent 10% more.
And it's gone up. I mean, like my first year here, it was around 3% since COVID.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Shipping costs.
I don't think Fisher charges us shipping, right?
So where it comes from.
They did?
If it comes from their warehouse, if you see it comes from one of their warehouses, it'll be like $7. If it comes from direct supplier, it's whatever that supplier will charge. So you have to just be kind of careful.
And especially like when you order cell culture or some dry ice, if you need dry ice, it might look like, oh, they only charge you $7 or $9.
Yeah.
Sometimes they have, we seen like $150 dry ice fee when you only buy $300 worth of ingredients. That happens a lot.
So there is a way to see that in CU Blood Plus, or you have to wait?
You have to go to the invoice to
Yeah,
see
the
the
invoice.
details, but I mean,
Yeah, or you just go and talk to Jared or Dale or Mary, like every 3 months and sort of say, where am I?
But it goes back, I think, when Ray mentioned, forward thinking about how much are you spending? What are you gonna be at the end of next year? How much actually you have? I always try to really think about in terms of like. I keep really meticulous details. I look at every month, see how much I'm spending, where I am within the budget, but. It's a lot of work, but we see a lot of things like. Where you should be maybe ordering engagements with a different company because shipping would be.
Jared, I don't want to open up a can of worms for you. Do you distribute grant activity to the ICE? So I should have brought an example, or at least had it on the screen. I apologize for that. There's a report that comes out for each grant. Your startup package is has a separate grant fund. Your if you have 2 R01s, each one would have a separate fund. Any state funded grants, any industry funded grant, any grant has a separate fund. And it's there to track costing from really a university standpoint, sort of report, et cetera. But that's information that you should look at that every month. Just to see, oh man, I've spent this much on this. I've only got $10,000 left of a $50,000 budget. I gotta manage this better. It just gives you an idea of where you're at. And if something looks wrong, then the ability exists where you say, there is no way I spent $50,000 on research supplies, just no way, or lab services or whatever. Then Jared or somebody can look into the accounting system and say, oh, well, here's the 3 largest drivers of that cost. Are these yours? And you look at it and you go, I didn't buy anything from Fisher. No, that's somebody else's, or that belongs on a different grant of mine, maybe. And we just coded it wrong at the front end. So believe me, it's good to just get in the habit of looking at those things. It's information that's available to you. I would use it.
And it's in a form that only an accountant can love.
Oh my God. Even the accountants don't love it. I'm gonna tell you right now. I will tell you right now, it is.
It's
Yeah.
laser spend 15 minutes in Jared's office every month and. Translate that, Jared.
Do you think it's good to have like a set up a meeting with the administrator?
Yeah, especially till you do understand it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hard to understand.
so
Just need somebody to walk it through you once.
regarding that report, you can control how much you spend for the reagents usually, but the personnel costs, like it's there, and assuming the percentage, the effort stay the same, is there any way that we can kind of predict how much the personnel costs? Like nowadays, we come to you and then you do some magic and numbers, but
Yeah.
I don't know whether is there a function in the system that already kind of project the future
Ooh, no,
expense?
no, but I'm gonna say. I keep spreadsheets so that, I reconcile every month the salaries and then. I've got some formulas in there so I can project out to the end of your grant and say, okay, this is how much you'll be spending. And I can share that with you, but then it's a manual process. Okay. Or you can just ask me and I'll be glad to just tell you.
And once you have staff in place though, it's easy for Jared to know recurring. And then you can say, let's say you have multiple grants, I'll talk about this in a little bit, about shared staffing. You have an opportunity where what you're doing aligns with what a fellow faculty member is doing, and you can share a resource. So that 100% charge for that lab technician now becomes 50% of that salary, and you're sharing with somebody else, and you both get the benefit of that resource instead of you both having to eat 100%, and it's just not efficient utilization of that time or those dollars.
I've shared a tech with somebody for 10 years, multiple techs with multiple faculty.
But if you are looking forward and like your budget for staff, I think there's certain times of the year where they're costs.
Twice a year, the lab technicians or the bi-weekly paid staff will get 3 grades 2 times a year.
But also in terms of like their merit increase.
Yeah.
And then like what we saw at the postdocs kind of seen a pretty big jump. So some of those things might come unexpectedly.
Right.
So having a little extra funds.
Well,
I'm sure Ray has said this before, but the one thing I don't like about finance is that it's so rigid that it only sticks to the year end between July 1st and June 30th. Because when grants don't always start June 1st, and it will not tell me how much money I have left. And if that, particular grant is going to end, let's say January 30th. So we then have all these craziness, not only in June where we can't order stuff because it can't be delivered before the end of the year here at Creighton. We have the same thing, we have to do the same thing again when we can't order things in, say, January because the year ends for that particular grant. So it's quite very flexible in that way. I don't know if there's a way that we can use the accounting system that will match the anniversary of particular research.
I don't know the answer to that. It is not a flex, it is definitely hard coded to a organizational year end, not a grant year.
Maybe you kind of
Yeah.
have, it's a project we should try and look into because if we get more and more federal dollars, then we're going to be, mainly on different anniversaries for the renewal, the non-competing renewal of particular grants. October 1 or December 1 or April 1.
I think when you carry over year to year, actually, you had a grant that started on May 1st. Might be to your benefit because you're not beholden to the year end cutoff. So when next year comes around, and let's say your grant ends on April 30th, that's when it has to be done, and you have expenditures that maybe trickle in after that, I think we can move those back. What we can't do is move them if your grant ends on June 30th. From an accounting system standpoint, we can't move them if they trickle in July. We can't move them back. That was somebody made a comment earlier about there's a hard cutoff for state grants, June 30th. And so it's actually to your benefit to have a grant that doesn't start in the fiscal year. It just is because we've got some flexibility during the organization's fiscal year to align things or make them better, work with your grant year. Whereas if your grant year is the end of the fiscal year, Yeah, it's not pretty.
Actually, I hadn't heard that advantage before with having the anniversary date separate from the institutional fiscal year. So that is a benefit. But I never came across this at my prior institution. It was never an issue. You could always do things backwards and forwards anyway.
Really?
And their fiscal year was October 1. We never had anything there like we have here.
That sounds like a question for grants accounting, to see what we can and can't do.
I do know there is a report that Grants County pulled that the report will give you based on grant year.
Yeah.
We just have to request
Oh.
it. Yeah,
Oh,
it does exist.
oh, it does exist.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I wonder where then.
That's good.
Yes. Okay, University Department, School Medicine Resources mainly applies to cores. There are university funded cores, i.e. DR, Family Resource or Research Facility. There are department cores, which are generally what I call shared equipment cores. Could be autoclaves, could be imaging equipment, could be whatever. And they might be shared across departments, to be honest. They're almost a departmental core. And there's School of Medicine cores, which are your histology, sequencing with genomics, flow cytometry. And it's just knowing the value to know who's funding what, I think. Cores that are funded and operated by the School of Medicine are maybe a little more facilitated the School of Medicine faculty. It's a university core. We're nicer to our faculty than the university might be, because they've got to be nice to all the faculty, right? There's certain guidelines they have to have that we maybe don't. Facilities. There are certain things you can do in your lab and you can do what you want to. There are things that you cannot do to your lab until you get approval from facilities. Even for instance, Jason Bartz wanted to put up shelving in his lab. Facilities told him he couldn't put shelving up on the walls, even though he could easily do it himself until he had approval. Shelving. Exactly a high cost item. Okay, there's just certain things that if it has to deal with the four walls in your lab, the benches, whatever, you gotta have approval for it. It's not that they're gonna say no. They're probably gonna say yes, as long as they're here's a funding source. Dr. Hansen's shaking her head. But just know, ask your administrator, hey, can I do this, or do you need approval, or whatever the case is, right? They'll generally keep you in line. Human resources. I find it more and more valuable the older I get, even though I usually don't like the answer I get. If it's an issue that has to do with an employee, visit with human resources. Again, funnel it through Jerry, funnel it through your administrator. If you have issues with a lab tech, if you have issues with an outside resource outside your area, maybe in core, where the case is.
You have an issue with somebody in the core, the core director would like to
Good.
hear about
I
it.
agree with that.
And if not them, I would like to hear about it. And Brianna can always be a conduit to me or in my place discussion. I mean, if it's a Title IX issue or whatever, then it goes to the appropriate place. But we want to know if there are issues.
I 100% agree with that. Try to resolve the issue internally within your area or your department first. And if it can't be resolved at that level, then take it up and get advice. And seriously, your administrator will know, ooh, this smells really bad. There you go, we need to get some outside advice on how to handle this. Okay? Research protocols. Depending on animal affected, human affected, whatever, IRB, IACUC sponsored programs, I mean, that's just part of the rules of the game of research. Right? Somebody's got to approve that protocol before you can implement that. Research animal housing and support. Pretty easy to, if you need animals, you need to support those animals. How many colonies, how many individuals, how many groups, how many whatever. Contact, do they contact Pet Steel directly for that?
No, you go through the IRB and, or sorry, the IAPAC to get
The IAPAC
the
for
protocol
that?
approved, and then if you want to order it, it goes to.
Oh, okay, so you get the approval, you develop the protocol, you get the protocol approved by IACUC, and then you can order the
Yeah.
animals identified within that protocol.
And they order them for you.
Okay. Some awards we talked about,
Radiation.
what's that?
It's the same with radiation.
Some awards, we've already talked about that. Always have a formal agreement. Always. Somebody says, nah, just go ahead and do it. No, get an agreement. And they should know better than that. If they're telling you just go ahead and do it without an agreement, then it's probably shouldn't be happening anyway, to be totally honest with you. Consultants, can you use consultants? Absolutely, you can use consultants. I would tell you that's a great place to go to your mentor, other faculty, maybe if you've got individuals that are that you're doing research with in other organizations, visit with them about successful consultants, people that were good about your specific research aim, etc., or general topic of research. They're absolutely allowable. Again, if you're using consultants, put some kind of document in place. It could be something as simple as a one-page memorandum of understanding. Jerry can help you with that. But have something, have a document. It just helps if something goes awry.
So we've used a lot of consultants through the COBRA, and consultants won't get paid unless there's a memorandum of understanding or contract. So you won't be able to pay them until you have.
That is true. The university wants to know, they set those consultants up as a vendor. You're purchasing a service from them. So they need things like banking information. They need a tax ID information. They need to see if it's an authorized vendor or legitimate vendor of services, or if this is a conduit of money to something that just isn't right. Okay, so it's really having those agreements in place is really to protect you as well as the institution.
Can it be outside the US?
It can be. Now, there's a couple more hoops you gotta jump through for that, but yes. Okay. Publication costs, absolutely allowable, absolutely wanted. Invest in yourself, invest those publication costs. If you don't have funds for publication costs within your grant, because if you say, oh, yeah, it's gonna cost me $5,000 to publish this article, and it's really, this is meaningful to me in my career, my work. Approach your chair. There are funds that chairs have available for that. Approach Dr. Hanson. There are funds available. Part of my job is taking the pools of money, and there are multiples of them, and saying, okay, this is the first pool we want to go to. And we used all of that. Yes, we have. Okay, let's go to pool number 2. Oh, well, that doesn't make sense because this is for this research purpose, and the pool doesn't address that research purpose. Let's go to the next one. Whatever the case is, once it gets to Dr. Hanson's level, then I can help decide which pool of funds to get through. But we will go through that progression, no different than we did for bridge funding. Bridge funding might go to you first with funds that you have set aside in your indirect cost recovery pool. Then it'll go to the department. Then it'll go to the school. Then it'll go to the dean specifically for funds he has available, but we want to see that progression. It's going to a chain of command, if you will. Resource question, right? And travel. You control travel that's being charged to your grants and awards. It just needs to be specifically for when you have a grant, it needs to be related to your research. And I will tell you, even though we don't manage it quite as rigidly, but with startup funds, the rules that apply to grants also apply to startup funds, even though they're more discretionary type funds, if you will. So if alcohol and parties are an unallowable cost on a federal grant, those are unallowable costs on your startup package.
Overseas travel,
What's that?
overseas travel.
Overseas travels
Could
are
you
great.
address that?
Allowable or not.
Is it allowable? It is allowable, but it has to be approved. There's a separate approval process for that. Once it's approved, it's good.
A separate? I thought it was just the travel, like portal, it just, instead of going to you, it goes to another risk officer, like in parallel.
So if it's overseas travel, and I know that's aligned with something you're doing. Matter of fact, I think one just came across for
Yes.
you. Timely question. And I'm sitting there going, oh yeah, that's a line. I know that's aligned with his research. I know that's what he's doing, et cetera. So I just said, yep, go out, I have to go to the dean. I know there's alignment. If there's not alignment, I will go to the dean. Are you aware of this? And he'll 9 times out of 10 look at me and go, I have no clue. So then I'll call up your chair. Is typically what happens. Not a lot of that happens, to be honest with you, but it can. Okay, so if you're doing research with co-investigators and stuff like that, and you need to travel overseas to, effectively consult about something, that's probably going to be applicable to your chargeable to your grant. Okay.
And the way that overseas is defined is like in Canada, but that's considered overseas.
It's still international travel.
It is. Yeah. Anything goes across the US border.
What's the timeline? Like, you have to submit a long time in advance the approval, or that's something that can be done quite fast?
So give me that question again.
The timeline to be approved for overseas travel?
If you give us at least a month's notice. And typically, you're probably booking that far, you wanna book out that far in advance or more, just to get good rates.
It depends on the destination, like if your destination of country is on the CDC risk list or
yes.
on the
Yeah.
departmental state list,
Good point.
then different story.
Yeah.
But if you're just going to Canada, Europe, it's fine.
I'm asking because I read your email, but
Oh, yeah, that's
there is
right.
a conference in China.
Yeah.
Quite soon on Meniere's disease, and I did not saw it before, so that's why I'm asking what's the timeline for it.
Yeah, and then there's an app that we use, Alert Traveler, and then we have to fill out a travel request form. They've always approved all travel, but if we travel for personal reasons overseas, do we still have to alert the department and the university?
I don't think so. No, if it's for, so you're going on vacation with your family overseas. Not to my knowledge now, that could change if we get under another pandemic situation, just because they want a little risk exposure, right? But today, not to my knowledge.
Yeah, there was maybe a small period of time with COVID there that
But
the
that was
university
actually-
didn't
Yes.
know anybody
Yes.
traveling
That's
internationally.
right.
but-
So when I first joined, there's a Canadian conference that I have to go to. And university blocked all international travels, so I paid out of my pocket to go. Yeah, that's the one time like the university just blocked everything, because every single country is on the list.
Yeah, I haven't seen, outside the pandemic, I haven't seen that happen. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also,
About 10 minutes left. I don't know if there were,
Yeah,
Some
let's start on
targets you wanna make
staffing.
sure
We're
you
gonna,
get.
we're gonna have to, we'll have to set up a second one. And I kind of knew that when I started putting the list together. That's all right. These are good conversations. I hope it's valuable to everybody.
If I may just ask a small question, assume, depending on how you wanna pay for the travel, is it like frowned upon if you use your own funds and get it reimbursed, or do you have to go through a coach?
No, you can do it a reimbursement.
And
And-
what's the easier way?
So. Jared, how do you,
Yeah.
how do you do it? Do you do it where they have to, faculty are encouraged to file their own reimbursement request, or do you funnel it through one person?
Yeah, so it really is up to you. Do you wanna wait and get reimbursed later, or if you wanna use the department, credit card to book your airline and hotel and the conference? Well, that's
And it's
easier,
just a department head, like that department credit cards, right?
Some of it, I mean, if you get. Let's say you get points, travel points or whatever, use your own, yeah, you know what? Do it.
Yeah.
I will tell you that if you submit a receipt with your travel reimbursement request, if you have the right receipts. That evidence payment, not that you booked a room or booked a flight, that actually shows you paid for the flight. Right, so it shows that you had cash flow out of your own personal funds. That reimbursement process, typically. It hits my bank before I'm getting charged on my credit card for it. I mean, it goes through. So keep those receipts, submit them. I personally think the app that the university has to submit those travel requests, after you do it the first 1 or 2 times, pretty easy.
So the app is to submit requests.
or you can, or in our
It
case,
goes through C by Plus is what
Yeah.
it is.
in our case, you submit it to your administrator, give them the
Okay.
receipts. Cause they'll ask for, if you're attending a conference, they'll want something that shows that there was actually a conference and you were registered. Yeah, but yeah, otherwise they process, I think, twice a week, so it goes real quick.
And Ray is right, it is fast, it's faster than the previous institution where no matter how long in advance I booked my flight, I had to wait until after I flew and came back before they would reimburse me. So, this is nice, that you can get reimbursed quickly.
So there is a conference that our lab usually go yearly, and it happens usually October or November. But registration and the abstract start like very early. So abstract fee and then registration starts like August. And the hotel, after the register, we can book it. And the flight, we want to buy earlier than later because we want to save our funding. So it happened all the different times, so I usually, I used to wait until that after, until that, the conference. And then after that, I just put all together and then submit the reimbursement. That's I used to do that because I don't want to do like. And then it happened. And then there's a issue that I have to spend money and then I have to for reimbursement, I have to submit in 30 days. So is that is there a way that I can, like in 30 days, but the conference, from the day we have the conference in 30 days, it will be very comfortable for us to do this because not only myself, I'm a student, postdoc, and I have to do like all this every time. So it's yeah.
Once you're established in the system, I would tell you, I think it's pretty easy to submit periodically. And I think it's 60 days is the time frame. So yeah, if you're setting up your airfare and your lodging in advance, I'd get reimbursed for that part of it through one request. Then go to the conference, you incur your meals, your miscellaneous travel, your parking, where the case is, and submit another reimbursement request after. That's the way I do it. It seems to be facilitated with the university process. The university will kick back, if it's the first time or the second time, maybe even the third time, not much kickback. But if it's a repeat offender where you're constantly late, or it's a situation where you're playing games between years and they think that's what's happening, they'll push back. Or if you try to submit something that's a year old, the answer is no. It won't get reimbursed.
So do new faculty still have to submit like a special request or something to get set up CU by Plus for these sort of reimbursements, or is it more streamlined now because everybody's required to receive their pay by direct deposit?
I think in terms of reimbursements, I think you have to sort of set up, in terms of if you're ordering or you're they're an approver, then they have to go through a brief approver training in CU by Plus.
So if you have a payroll account set up, the approval there's still a setup. You still have to put yourself into the system and get approved the first time into the system, but it's easy because they already have all of your banking information, your demographics, et cetera. You basically, either you or your administrator sets up a request that says, hey, can we add Dr. Kashyap to the travel reimbursement requests? Very seldom, I've never seen it. Is it a no? Unless they're not an employee, then you get more information, et cetera. If it's an employee and they find you in the system because you have to submit your Creighton net ID, et cetera, all that information, if they find it in the system, they line it up with payroll, boom, 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 it's set up. He gets an email back, or Dr. Kashyap would get an email back, says, yep, you're ready to go. And then it's just you doing it. But I still do think there is a first time setup, just to get you initiated in the system.
If you haven't asked for
So I think-
anything to be reimbursed, yet,
Yeah,
you gotta.
I think travel relocation reimbursement. There was some that happened, I guess, so, yeah.
I did the once or twice by myself through the CU by Plus.
Alright.
Yeah, there's a one expense tab. You just submit your receipts and the reimbursement to this.
It's pretty slick. to be
Oh, it's not
honest with
slick.
you. But they are picky about the receipts. You have to have supporting documentation. And it has to evidence that you paid for something.
Well, there anything for the CU by Plus reimbursement is, I don't think we have control which funds you get reimbursement from. So I think it's better to ask Olivia what you have to.
Yeah.
Olivia will just do it for you.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I'm gonna ask Brianna and Dr. Hanson, if we could set up another, I don't need, we only got a minute or two left. I think, first of all, the discussion we've had is wonderful. Thank you very much. I think the highest risk item that I'd really like to talk about, and you've already gotten some of this already with your HR side, is the staffing side. There's the research is your research. Once you involve other people in that research, it can't, I'm not saying it does, it is always, it's not always. It's kind of one of those 5% of the time, but just when that 5% of that time comes up, it encompasses your entire life.